So the Supreme Court is now hearing oral arguments on the legality of President Trump's, quote, Liberation Day tariffs imposed on dozens of countries, including China, Mexico, and Canada. This ruling could impact tens of billions of dollars in tax revenue and affect trade worldwide with some of the U.S.'s largest trade partners. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson questioned Trump's tariff authority, calling the Solicitor General's argument inconsistent with the law cited by the administration.
It seems a little inconsistent to say that we have to interpret a statute that was designed to constrain presidential authority, consistent with an understanding that Congress wanted the president to have essentially unlimited authority.
So I have on the line with me managing editor with the SCOTUS blog. If you haven't checked that out, you need to. Kelsey Dallas. Thanks, Kelsey, for joining me today.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
So just help break down for us what's being argued today. What's the legal question here?
The key legal question is whether President Donald Trump had the authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose those tariffs you were referencing. So that's what Trump cited when he was doing the Liberation Day tariff. And the question is, was that an appropriate interpretation of that law, which is also called IEEPA?
So how does this compare to previous rulings where the court limited executive power, like Biden's student loan forgiveness program, for example?
The reason it connects to those is a concept called the major questions doctrine. And it's sort of a theory that says if Congress wanted to address a really important topic, such as who has the power to make a tariff, to impose a tariff, then it would say so directly. In IEEPA, it uses the words regulate importation, and it doesn't actually use the word tariff. And so part of what's happening in this case is a question of whether the Trump administration has overinterpreted IEEPA to the point that the court has to pull it back.
So it seems to me that the court has been largely siding with President Trump and his ability to do a variety of things. Are there any early indicators on how justices might be leaning with this case?
Right. As you noted, this court over the past 11 months or so has ruled for President Trump multiple times, but it's important to note that those rulings came on what's called the emergency docket or interim docket, meaning that the court was just addressing whether a policy could remain in place temporarily as the lawsuit continued. This is where they're taking on the underlying question, and the decision will actually affect the long-term status of these tariffs. Coming into the case, I think most legal experts were predicting that the court would rule against the Trump administration and block the tariffs. And I think that's really where people ended the arguments as well. After nearly more than 2.5 hours of debate, I think most legal experts think the court will strike down the tariffs. However, there were some people waffling because there were tough questions for both sides.
So let me ask you this on how it might apply with what the Senate has done. So I think it was last week, the Senate voted to, I think, on a resolution to basically say President Trump doesn't have the power to impose tariffs. Does that have any bearing at all on the actual ability to impose tariffs, or are we really just waiting for the Supreme Court?
Well, only in the sense that this case, because it's about executive authority or presidential power, it also implicates the power of Congress. So the court has to think about what the founders wanted to do, who they wanted to assign the power to do certain things to, and whether a ruling for the Trump administration would cause a major shift of what was intended with the Constitution and what was intended when Congress passed IEEPA. So there were questions and debates in today's oral arguments where the justices were reflecting on whether a ruling for Trump would then make it impossible for Congress to ever weigh in on tariffs imposed under IEEPA. And I think the justices get nervous about doing that because you're saying, okay, I've totally taken away Congress's power to be any sort of check on the president.
That would seem to be a key issue with the U.S. Constitution and the balance of powers. So that's an interesting take. President,
but to clarify, it would be a specific type of tariffs, not all tariffs. So these tariffs that are invoked because the president claims that there is an emergency going on.
So the president is also claiming he has emergency powers to, bomb boats off the coast of Venezuela. Are those? I know it's not the same argument, but it just feels like there's a lot of pushing of boundaries with this current administration.
I believe that's a fair assessment. What's interesting is that although you could imagine a world where that would be the focus of the Supreme Court's ruling, is saying, oh, we don't really agree with what the president has said about how much of an emergency we're experiencing. The legal experts that we've had address the case for SCOTUS blog have said the court gets very nervous about trying to define emergency or trying to criticize the president invoking emergency. And so it prefers, if it's not happy with what the president has done, to sort of go a different route to scale it back. And so in this case, it's very well possible that the ruling would focus just on the text of the statute or just on past rulings about Congress and the power balance with Congress and the president, instead of the court saying something about, wow, Trump has really gone off the rails here and this isn't the right way to define emergency. I will note that it came up just slightly in arguments with Justice Sotomayor referencing the recent kerfuffle over Canada's ad on the tariff and how it aired during the World Series. And Sotomayor was clearly saying she doesn't agree with this idea from Trump that it's an emergency because it wouldn't be seen as an emergency to then punish Canada for creating such an ad.
Interesting. Thank you, Kelsey.